Hello, this is Darlene Lev, and I'm unfriended. Today, I want to talk about the Renee Good ICE debacle, tragedy, something that should not have happened, something that could have been prevented. I'm going to read an essay that I posted on my Substack, Notes from the Underdog L, that a lot of that got a really positive response. One of my modus operandi here is that we should all know by now that there are two very different media streams. And it seems to me, since I inhabit both media streams, that the left side stream doesn't have any idea what's going on the right stream. But not only that, if confronted with any additional information from the right stream, the left stream will dismiss it as coming from the right. In other words, and this is my experience having been a left stream reader for many, many years. And then I embarked on a writing project and started reading the right side stream and noticed that the right side stream presented evidence that the left side stream did not. And in most cases, that evidence would convince me that the right side stream was more believable, better informed than the left. And that is what led to my moving out of the left side stream into probably a more right-leaning center perspective. But anyway, one of my biggest concerns here is the lack of objectivity. To a rather alarming degree, people who cannot look at the situation objectively and weigh the evidence and then make up their minds. I got into a kerfuffle on Facebook, something that I like to do because I'm kind of interested in how this works in terms of the court of public opinion. When I post a salient detail on, say, someone's Facebook post, how many people will pile on me, not based on what I actually said, but based on where I appear to be coming from. They think I'm from the deadly, dastardly, dubious right, and therefore I don't deserve to be heard. That seems to be the gist of what they are saying. So when it came to the Renee Good killing, when I heard about it, my first thought was, okay, well, I've got to look at the video. Well, actually, my first thought was, this sounds extreme. It was being called a murder. It was being presented as some innocent woman was just out somehow and wound up in the middle of an ICE raid and got shot and killed for no reason. And I of course, I have to wait and see how much evidence I can gather before I um, believe that. So I wound up pushing back on calling it murder because words are very important and propaganda functions on the misuse or deployment of certain words. And murder is certainly the wrong word to use in this case. It is an accident. It is a tragic accident. It is a terrible tragedy, not just for Renee Good and all who knew her, but also for the ICE officer who shot her. He has to live with that for the rest of his life. And even if he did call her a fucking bitch after firing that fatal shot, um, well, I've said that too when somebody nearly runs me over when I've got the right of way crossing the street. Um, it is an expletive that is expressed after a near miss, or if somebody pushes you to do something you shouldn't have done. So, how did Renee Good end up in this terrible situation in the first place? Well, my essay is titled, If Only Renee Good Had Been Given the Gift of Fear, she would still be alive today, and an ICE officer wouldn't have blood on his hands. One salient cause of Renee Good's senseless death while confronting ICE in Minneapolis is that she apparently felt invincible. In video taken by the ICE agent who fired the fatal shot, she grins through the driver's side window of her vehicle, mocking the agent's approach, saying, "I'm not mad at you." Her wife, Rebecca, comically swaggers, announcing that she's a U.S. citizen in the misguided belief that ICE is only allowed to arrest illegal aliens. Prior to the agent's approach, a 3-minute video taken from what appears to be an upper window shows Good's vehicle relentlessly honking while parked perpendicular on the road. Good had emboldened herself with the authority to obstruct ICE in their official duty, but she was not legally afforded such jurisdiction. Her effort to impede ICE by honking and whistling was also causing a civil disturbance. This ardent belief that anyone should be allowed to enter the United States without legal processing is off kilter on its face. Besides, didn't Good know that the US government offers free travel and a $1,000 payment to self-deport? A witness claimed that the Goods had been successfully blocking ICE by the time the agents embarked on arresting them. Why is the left so zealously determined to protect illegal actions? And why do these self-appointed warriors so flagrantly flout the laws of civility? Good's demise is hard to watch. So was George Floyd's. The use of force generally is painful to witness. I once encountered a New York City police officer whacking a man with his club in a subway station. My impulse was to side with the man resisting arrest, even though I had no idea what crime he'd committed. I've seen police approach men in Washington Square Park, order them to empty their backpacks of illegal drugs, slap on the cuffs, and drag them out. My head goes straight to, they're not hurting anyone, even though Washington Square is haunted by drug-addled zombies. Seeing authorities yank a father away from his children in the middle of the night tugs at the steeliest of hearts. But there are laws. Somehow the left believes that these laws apply to some but not to others, and most certainly not to themselves. Renee Good committed herself to vigilante justice that does not serve law-abiding Americans, and that includes legal immigrants. She died fighting for the right for anyone to walk into the United States without the due process for legal entry. She died fighting for Tren de Arugua to cut off the fingers of snitches. She died for human traffickers, scooter thieves, and identity robbers. She was so impassioned in her crusade that she felt no fear in impeding the agent's mission that sorry January morning. All puffed up on her training for Ice Watch, she appears to feel quite pleased with being cocky. I'm not mad at you, she informs the officers, as if she is the authority here. During the BLM race hysteria, Black Americans spoke of the talk that they must have with their children in deference to the mythology that police are out randomly arresting Black people for being Black. But every parent must teach their children comply with the officer's commands or suffer serious consequences. Renee Good's tragic death illustrates this fact of life. Circa 1980, all puffed up on hippie justice, I talked back to some Chicago cops ordering me not to cross some barrier. Drunk, confused, and lost, I shouted that I was just looking for my bus. They shouted back, "Do not cross that line." I do not know why, but I did cross that line. The next thing I knew, I was cuffed and hurled around in the back of an erratically driven paddy wagon. At the station, run exclusively by Black women, I was physically abused. One official twisted my wrist and broke my grandmother's antique watch. They hung up the phone in the middle of my one phone call, leaving me uncertain whether anyone would come to bail me out of my cell. I have no idea why I literally crossed the line. I behaved in much the same way Renee Good did that fateful morning. I was brazenly disrespectful to the police under the false belief that as a woman I could get by with anything. In other words, I was asking for it. The feminist social justice industry proclaims asking for it as blaming the victim, ergo, this utterance is forbidden. But there is truth to it. To use my own case as an example, I should have heeded the officer's orders. I should have stood still and calmly asked them where was the bus to the merchandise mart. Instead, ingrained with the all cops are pigs narrative, I mouthed off and paid the price. How quickly we forget that we're all human. Not just the mango seller wearing a papoose in the subway, but also the officer tasked with collecting her, painful as that is to witness. Threatening people is unwise in most cases. Even more unwise is the inability to recognize a threat, which the illusion of safety in our current society has nearly obliterated. Not only that, but we are being indoctrinated to ignore the red flags with idiotic injunctions like, don't judge. Case in point, also back in the 80s, when a schizo Black man was approaching on a dark sidewalk, my little voice advised crossing the street to avoid him, a better instinct that was overridden by the narrative hissing, it's racist to fear Black men. So I continued walking towards him. He grabbed me, clasped my neck, and threatened to rape me. Paradoxically, I fearlessly and fearfully looked him straight in the eyes and said, "Don't." He released his grip. I ran like hell on The Gift of Fear, a book that Renee Good should have read. The Gift of Fear by Gavin de Becker is a best-selling 1997 self-help book that teaches readers to trust their intuition to recognize and avoid violent situations, arguing that fear is a survival signal, not a weakness. De Becker, a security expert, provides practical advice on spotting danger in various scenarios like street crime, domestic abuse, and stalking, using real-life examples to illustrate how to interpret subtle cues and respond effectively. The book emphasizes that most violence is predictable and that learning to say no and trust one's gut feelings are crucial for self-protection. Of course, I have some other thoughts on how trusting one's fears can go a little bit too far But this case, I think, seems pretty obvious. Um, this reminds me of an afternoon in Bedford-Stuyvesant Park where I was sitting on a bench grading essays while various groups picnicked at the tables and on the grounds. Deep in my work, I sensed a shift in the air. Lifting my head, I watched as the women en masse began hurling toddlers into strollers that they hightailed out of there while I sat dumbfounded. The next thing I knew, a platoon of young black men appeared out of nowhere, scaled the high fence, and attacked a group of black men on the other side. These women carried the gift of fear, reacting to a sense of danger to which I was oblivious. Social justice missionary Ryan Carson, 32, was killed on a Bedford-Stuyvesant sidewalk in the wee hours of an October morning in 2023. If Carson knew a healthy amount of fear, he wouldn't have been on that street with a girlfriend in formal wear in the first place. Scowling within a black hood, Brian Dowling, 18, stomped past Carson and his girlfriend on a bus bench to kick scooters and cars down the block. Rather than get the hell out of there, Carson naively approached Dowling, telling him to chill. Swiftly, Dowling drew his knife and stabbed Carson in the heart. He toppled over the bus bench and died in front of his gobsmacked girlfriend. During COVID, in a faculty meeting concerning anti Asian hate, it was suggested that we, a group of middle aged white females, mostly, there's one other woman, not white, who was talking quite a bit about being afraid to leave her apartment during COVID. Um, anyway, it was advised that we, or suggested that we intervene if we saw any anti Asian hate occur on the streets of New York City. This under the risible supposition that the perpetrators were white bigots easily subdued by middle aged white women. However, in all the videos I saw, the perpetrators were mainly black schizophrenics let loose on the streets due to the thematic ignorance posited in this essay, denying a justifiable fear of psychologically disturbed people, arguing that they just need mental health services and all will be well. This is sheer hubris. I offered that instead of acting as proxy law enforcement, we should give our students the tools to recognize danger and get the hell out of there. For example, I said, when you see a crazy person, do not make eye contact with them. A law of nature as old as the hills. My constituents rolled their eyes. One woman, a millennial from Wisconsin, scoffed and said that she smiles at everyone. To which I responded, yeah, that's how your blonde hair ends up in a ditch. We are constantly being fed TV and movies that feature unrealistically intrepid women socking men in the jaw and stepping back to mock his weakness. But the truth is that most men can knock out most women with a minimal amount of effort. Meanwhile, women rue that they can't walk alone at night without fear. They insist that the world has to change so that they can feel safe. At the same time, they do walk around alone at night and they do put themselves in harm's way by going home intoxicated with men they hardly know, not only flouting their own insistence that the world isn't safe, but traditions that obligated the good males to protect women from what will always be a dangerous world. That the world is a dangerous place is something that most men seem to inherently know, but for women conditioned to believe that men should never hit women, they seem to think they can get by with taunting men without suffering any consequences. I know I did. Renee Good, self-proclaimed Ice Watch warrior, made the ultimate sacrifice for nothing. She saved no lives. Her foolish self importance led to orphaning a son who had already lost his father. Where she ought to have been protecting her child like a mama bear, she subjected herself to danger by putting herself on the offensive in a federal legal matter. One also has to take into consideration the two children that she lost custody of. When it goes to the father, that's a very damning situation because it usually sides with the court usually sides with the mother. Despite her laying on the horn, the revolutionary poetry, the flannel shirts, and the bluster, ICE will continue delivering illegal immigrants back to their native lands, as has been done for decades, because entering the United States without legal processing is against the law for good reason. While it was certainly Good's right to express her belief in open borders, she should have taken into consideration the effects of agitating an armed official much larger than herself, a human being justifiably sick and tired of her taunting. In various videos, you can see protesters pelting ICE with snowballs and other projectiles while screaming at the top of their lungs. This is provoking the bear. And yeah, if these protesters think that they're preventing another senseless killing by agitating these people and getting their cortisol and their adrenaline up again. This is not cause and effect thinking. Many note that the ICE officer should not have positioned himself in front of Good's vehicle in the first place, blaming the victim. This is allegedly against protocol and arguably flouting the fear that could have prevented Good's senseless death, which he'll have to live with for the rest of his life. And I have to interject here. He shouldn't have gotten in front of the vehicle, they say, because she was just trying to drive away. So, in other words, they're in the middle of arresting her for breaking federal law. And according to the left side reasoning, he should have gotten out of the way and just let her drive away, because obviously it's okay for her to drive away, and he wouldn't have gotten hit or threatened with getting hit if he had just gotten out of the way. And yet he's standing in front of the vehicle to prevent her from driving away under the supposition that she's a decent person who wouldn't run him over and try to kill him. I mean, yeah, okay, you shouldn't stand in front of a car because that person could hit the gas and kill you. But you should also be able to go into a man's apartment when you're drunk and not expect him to believe that you're there to have sex. Maybe Renee Good should have waited for his consent. I don't know. His likely intention was to prevent Good from fleeing arrest. Her intention seemed to be just that, to flee from the consequences of her own illegal actions, hitting him in the process. Renee Good's impulsive act, along with the ICE agent's impulsive act, ended her life. Two hapless human beings who should have respected the gift of fear. So what I'm saying here is that the officer should have felt afraid of standing in front of her vehicle, um, that she might try to run him over. He should have known that. But then again, if he should have known that she had the potential to run him over, then she's not a good person. We all need to develop a healthy fear of the police and heed the talk. If only Good had followed orders to step out of her vehicle, whether the order seemed justified or not. She should have known better to avoid agitating creatures much more powerful than herself. She should have understood that her righteousness did not place her above the law. Enjoy Williams' fabulous essay, Hawk. She describes how her beloved German shepherd suddenly and viciously attacked her, requiring surgery and plunging her into an abject feeling of betrayal. In the same vein, one day my beloved tuxedo cat, agitated by the tabby, chomped on my hand, leaving a deep puncture wound that required a tetanus shot and recording the incident on a government document. And in a powerful, highly recommended film, Grizzly Man, 2005, Timothy Treadwell arrogantly believed that the bears among whom he lived unarmed in the Alaskan wild were loyal companions who would always love him until he got eaten by one. And on that note, as I record this, protesters are filling the streets of Minneapolis, and there's a story how they raided an ICE vehicle of various tools. Why are they protesting the removal of people who are in the country illegally and who have chosen not to take the $1,000 to self-deport? Why do they want people to come into the country willy-nilly? Why do they want this? Or do they not fully comprehend the telos of their protest? I have seen this time and time again. It is objectively against the law to walk into any country you want and set up house. It's just illegal. That's the objective law. If we want to change the law and just let anybody and their brother come into the United States without vetting, without processing of any kind, we need to take a vote on that. As it is, I, as a resident of New York City, do not remember ever voting on sanctuary city designation. I don't remember this being on any ballot. And in the most recent election, there was a bill for transgender rights that was so confusingly written, and no matter where I went to get a grasp on what it truly means, it was almost impossible to find out. And it passed because most people thought that they were just doing the good thing by showing how open-minded they are. But meanwhile, there's a sign on the locker room that says that you can just go into any room you want according to how you identify. I haven't seen in the Y locker room per se anyone walking in who doesn't belong there biologically. But I have in New Jersey been ogled by a man pretending to be a woman who was just standing there in the woman's uniform watching women undress. And somebody who claimed to be a woman who isn't a woman is suing this particular establishment for trying to prevent him from being in the areas where women undress. If I have a right to control my body, and if I supposedly should give consent to anybody looking at or touching my body in any way as a woman, then why is it okay for anyone who claims to be a woman who isn't a woman? And by the way, I wasn't wearing my glasses, and I said to my friend, "That's a man." I could tell from across the room without wearing my glasses that that was a man acting as a woman. So I don't remember ever voting for any of this. And that I would say is also a problem. Very dubiously worded bills on our ballots that are almost impossible to decipher. First of all, if you're a transgender person, you already have the rights that the rest of us have. And what these bills do is give you more rights than the rest of us have. And that's a problem. And the same thing goes with sanctuary cities. These give these give people special privileges that the rest of us don't have. And I have a problem with that. And I have a problem with people like Renee Good awarding themselves the special privilege to break the laws that the rest of us don't have, or shall I say, the rest of us abide by. So, if only Renee Good had been given the gift of fear and recognized that she was placing herself in a very dangerous situation and that she wasn't thinking realistically about what could happen to her. And this is also evidenced by her partner crying, "Why did you have real bullets?" That is the salient line in all of that. Why did you have real bullets?